Hello, everybody. So my name is Sai Chen. I'm from Open Source Strategies in Los Angeles. So just a little bit about how I got here. So about 20 years ago, I quit my job as a hedge fund manager to start a business with my wife, and we wanted to sell high-end home furnishings online. And everybody told us it was impossible because one, nobody's going to buy expensive products online, and two, you can't do it without venture capital funding. For a while, it seemed they might be right. I went from managing billions of dollars to wondering exactly how do you sell something? But in the end, we did it. And the secret, I would say, was three things. One is the internet. That ability to have that global reach to both customers and suppliers was key. There was no way we could have done it without that. The second thing is we got really good at sourcing. I'm living proof that supply chain is important. Okay. And the third thing that worked for us was open source software. The ability to have something that was free, that was customizable to build our business with was just indispensable. In fact, I liked open source software so much, I started a company to sell open source ERP and CRM software that we developed. That's what open source strategy started out doing. So again, people told me this would be impossible because, come on, nobody's going to buy enterprise software without a big company standing behind it, right? I know, by the way, did you not know that you can't build a software business without venture capital funding? And yet it worked because open source sells. And that's going to be something I'm going to share with you on the call today. So, meanwhile, all this time, I've been kind of fascinated by climate as really an economics problem. It seemed to me that if climate change is happening, then there must be something wrong with all that economics I studied back at Wharton. So now looking at all together with my experience in the supply chain with enterprise software and now with blockchain, I think that this is going to be a big, in fact, probably the biggest opportunity any of us will get to work on. And it's going to be something that plenty of people will tell you it's impossible, but I think it could be done with open source, with blockchain in the supply chain. And so let me show you how that could work. So in case you didn't know, carbon accounting is all of a sudden a hot field. And let me tell you first of all, why. We're at the convergence of a lot of different trends right now that's driving interest in carbon accounting software and decarbonization. Okay, you've got consumers. 70% or more of the people in the world believe that climate change is real, and they want to support companies who do something about it. So everywhere now, right? You get a salad, you get burritos at the Chipotle, you get a pair of sneakers from Alberts, you shop for a flight on Google, you start to see emissions calculations and companies' sustainability pledges and whatnot, because it's important, especially for the younger consumers in the world. Related to that is you have carbon markets starting up all over the world. There's already 50 jurisdictions covering 1 billion people worldwide, and more are coming all the time. Okay, the EU has had carbon markets for over a decade. The UK has them. China has introduced carbon cap and trade. California has it. There's regional greenhouse gas initiative covering many states in the United States and Canada. It exists in Australia, in New Zealand. The state of Washington is introducing it. This is just happening all over the world, despite what you might be reading. The other thing that's been important is investors, okay? Some of the biggest fund managers in the world, BlackRock, which now manages over $9 trillion of assets. There's groups of net zero owners of finance, Climate 100 Plus, and they're pledging together with all the ESG funds. We're talking 50 plus trillion dollars of assets. They're saying, we want something done in the companies that we invest in about climate. And related to them is regulators all over the place. In the UK, EU, the SEC here in the United States are asking public companies for climate disclosures. And those will probably go to the other markets as well. And as part of this and just trying to stay ahead of the regulators, whatever combination you see, there's more and more companies joining this and saying, we're going to do something about climate. We're going to be net zero. Okay, you've got everybody from technology companies to IKEA to Nespresso to things that you might not have heard about. Big utilities in the United States, even oil and gas companies like Shell and BP saying, we are going to take the lead on climate. All of this requires, at its core, carbon accounting. Okay, knowing how much emissions are actually happening and decarbonization based on that carbon accounting. So, in case it matters to you, venture capitalists are totally hot on this idea, but maybe for the wrong reasons. And I'll show you in a little bit why I think that. So, why blockchain for carbon accounting? Why are we here? Carbon accounting is actually pretty easy, okay? It's just multiplication and addition. For everything that your business does, there's probably an emissions factor of how much CO2 emissions it contributed to. You use 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, there's an emissions factor that'll tell you, okay, you flew somebody across the United States on an airplane, there's another emission factor for that. In fact, we have that in our application, and I'll show you some screenshots of that. But what's really hard about carbon accounting is getting the data, okay? Getting the right data. This is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is the standard for calculating carbon emissions for corporations. And what they're asking for here, I just took it verbatim from their document, is they want you to use supplier-specific emissions data for the products and the services that you're actually purchasing, rather than industry averages and model data. But they'll freely admit that it's costly and difficult to determine and verify the source and quality. It says it right there. Okay, this is hard already. But what makes it impossible, or almost impossible, is that you have to go through the whole supply chain to do this. Okay, you don't just get to measure the emissions from the fuel that you used or the electricity you purchased. That's scope 1 and 2. What you need to measure is scope 3. This is where most companies' emissions are 60 to, in the case of, let's say, a natural gas utility, 90% of their emissions are from other things. It's from the things that you purchase from your suppliers. It's from the shipping of the goods to you, okay? It's from the shipping of your goods to your customers. It's from their use of your products. And it's from all the other things like travel and employee commuting and so on. And getting all this data requires going across industries, right, in your supply chain, going across countries because of our global supply chain. And it requires for big companies going into SMEs that may not report anything to anybody because they're too small to qualify for government reporting requirements. And yet you still need to get that data from them. So this is what has been the hardest part about carbon accounting. So this is the part that I've wondered. Did those startups tell the VCs that their SaaS platforms are going to connect all the industries and all the countries of the world so that they're going to be the Google and Facebook of climate? Did they tell people that it's easy to integrate with their software because they offer APIs? Well, you're in enterprise software. You know the latter is just not true, right? But the other thing is SaaS is database driven. They put data in silos. They're market specific. Every SaaS solution you see out there, it's either targeted at SMEs or enterprise customers, their price, their feature sets, and they don't really cross over from one to the other. And this is why the blockchain is needed. Because the blockchain, the magical thing about blockchain is that it's global yet private. Think about that. All these transactions that happen with cryptocurrencies, everything on blockchains, they happen globally. Everybody can access them, and yet there's enough to give people privacy for their data. Blockchains are designed for collaboration. So whereas SaaS solutions, I think of them as the new EDI with all the fun that promises. The blockchain is really the new internet. just go over this very quickly because a lot of people still have these perceptions about blockchains that they're waste energy and are just bad for the environment. Unfortunately, Bitcoin and Ethereum give us a bad name because they use proof of work algorithms that are really energy intensive. But a lot of other blockchains are not, and we've definitely spent time looking into this because this is important for what we do. People are also concerned blockchains cause speculation from cryptocurrency and NFT trading. But ultimately, blockchain is a technology. It supports technology of collaboration. And those are just use cases of it that maybe you don't like, but they're by no means the only thing you could do with it. And finally, I like this one. Blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. But whoever is still saying that is ignoring that blockchain is fundamentally changing industries, entertainment, gaming, supply chain, trade finance, and we believe climate as well. So I'd like to show you now what we've been building. And you're going to see three use cases. Two of them based on my own personal experience and needs being an open source developer, and one of them that I knew absolutely nothing about. So every time I fly, I want to check that box that says offset my emissions, but I just can't do it, okay? Because where's my money going? What does planting trees mean? And how much good is that really doing? And I started thinking about a transparent alternative to all those airline offsets. The second thing is I do run my own e-commerce business. And again, there's climate neutral shipping out there. But how do I really know what they're doing? And how do I really get to do something about climate that matters to me and my customers? The third one's really interesting, oil and gas methane reduction. Now, this is actually something that I knew nothing about, but that's the great thing about open source, what you can learn from other people. And this came from Bertrand, whom I met in Hyperledger. He worked at the King Abdullah Petroleum Science and Research Center in Saudi Arabia. And we just started working on this, and I'll show you and tell you why it's important in a little bit. The solution looks kind of like this at a high level. You get data coming in from web, from mobile, from ERP software, and they get routed to one or more auditors on the network. The auditors will review that data and issue emissions audits, which are NFT tokens of audited emissions. Those can then be used to create emission certificates, again, NFTs, of the products that you sell. That can be transferred to your customers. So your customers can start using the audited emissions from your products in their audits. And then those then in turn get transferred to their customers on and on down this chain. And this is exactly carbon accounting for the supply through the supply chain that we're talking about with the blockchain. So for example, you can go into this app and request an emissions audit for a flight that you took, attach a copy of your boarding pass or a ticket, and then submit it to the auditor like this. Similarly, you can request an audit for your electricity bill. Again, you upload a copy of your bill and you submit it. And we have emissions factors for that. And we have, using data from the UK government and the US EPA, emissions factors for a whole variety of things now. So burning of fuel, electricity, flights, shipping of goods, down to hotel travel, and so on and so forth. So the auditors, to answer Anna's question on the chat, are parties on the network who will review these requests and issue those certificates. So this is supposed to be quote unquote trusted parties. In a more advanced version, we could use a decentralized model, like these oracles where people have tokens and credits that they would stake on the audits. So they have something to keep them accountable to the results. And is the data available for South America? The data that we're currently using is from the UK government and the US EPA. So For South America, I would imagine just about every country publishes the emissions factors for its electricity grid as part of the clean development mechanism. So that data we could probably get. And then some of this data is general, like how much burning of, say, methane or natural gas emits. Some of it will be specific. And data is, in fact, a big challenge. Talk a little bit more about that. Do the auditors have to be certified? This is going to be based on how you want to use the network, right? If you're doing complex corporate scale emissions audits, yes, I believe the auditors should be certified. For a use case where we're verifying emissions from personal flights and travel, no, I don't think so. I mean, somebody just needs to verify that the ticket is for you and covers the trip that you talked about. So speaking of which, data could also come from your existing software system, like ERP or shipping systems. Here's an example of data coming in from UPS Quantum View on the right-hand side, using code to extract it. On the left-hand side, it could be in a generic JSON format. And it could just be fed into the system. So data could come in any form, and they go to the auditor like this, a page of pending emissions requests. Okay, and the auditor will review each request like this, and you see there's a location where they could get the content, which is encrypted with their public key. So they could download the content and decrypt it to review the request and either issue or decline an audit request. And once issued, the token looks like this. It has the total amount of emissions, it has what scope it is, and it has location of the documentation and the hash key to verify the documentation is the correct one. So this data could then is stored on the blockchain. And so a user could come in and search for example, their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So this is kind of a cool use case. This is the one with oil and gas methane reduction that I'm going to show you, that Bertrand told me about. So you might not have heard about this, but at every oil field, methane leaks out or is flared, meaning burnt, okay, because they're just underground and they need to come out to keep the operation going. And the climate impact of this, believe it or not, is equal to all the cars in the world. This is huge. And just now, the whole industry is coming around to really trying to address this. So in this example, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, there are different regions, different oil wells and producers. So we can audit the emissions for them, take the audited emissions for those areas, and then combine that with data about the products that they produce, oil and gas coming out of those oil fields, and then transfer that to their customers, which could be a natural gas utility that buys natural gas from different wells, so that they would know ultimately how much emissions footprint they have, and in that way incentivize buying from the better performing oil producers. And they could in turn use the same process to transfer this down to their customers, the buildings that use natural gas for heating, the trucks that use natural gas as fuel. So this is an example that we've worked on at Hyperledger for accounting for supply chain emissions in a very high emitting and important industry. Okay, so let's talk about some other opportunities. And if you came to this talk thinking, how could I make a business or make money off of an open source thing that's out there? I'm here to help you do just that. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So first thing, how do you take our open source software and make it a commercial offering? In addition to the usual stuff, you have, for example, UI and reporting, integration to people's ERP and software systems. You need two things. One is commercial data sets. We have gotten the data set from the UK government and US EPA, but if you're going to do commercial quality audits, you need to get more detailed data sets which are commercially available. The other thing that's really interesting is identity management, because on the blockchain, everything is pseudo-anonymous, right? People transact with crypto wallets. And in a real supply chain, people need to know who they're dealing with, who the counterparties are. So there will be a lot of cases where transactions are recorded on the blockchain, but someone else has to supply that identity layer. And around both open source and commercial products, there's just a lot of consulting opportunities for those of us who do that, from onboarding companies to calculating their emissions to just really analyzing their climate risks and helping companies manage their climate risks, to communicating with everybody from investors, customers, and regulators. So what I see with our open source project is actually a complete open source and commercial ecosystem, okay, where the blockchain is open source. So everybody can interact with it, and it's a transaction fee-based model. And then around it will be SaaS vendors that do commercial offerings. There will be consultants who do specialized services. There will be big corporate users, small companies that access the blockchain directly if they're technically savvy or they work with a consultant. And finally, applications that individual users could use to access this. In terms of the actual blockchain technologies, there's really also a continuum, right? There's the public blockchains, like these ERC compatible blockchains. And then there's permission blockchains like Hyperledger, Fabric, and Besu. So there will be some cases where companies and industries will want to work off of a permission chain to transact their data. And there will be some cases where across industries and across many companies, there will be cases for public blockchains. So it's really not a either or, but blockchain is really about bringing everybody and all these technologies together, in my point of view. Okay, and then a couple other tips. How do you sell climate accounting? Well, this is somebody else I met through the SIG, and his name is Hermano, and he's with a small fashion company in Italy. And he said that they filled out this voluntary survey. They were not required by anybody to do this for the Climate Disclosure Project. And after that, all sorts of companies reached out to them because they wanted to work with a company that had a climate strategy. Okay. Personal experience, we recently got a vendor onboarding survey from a major luxury goods company from France. And through all this basic standard information, they asked, what is your sustainability strategy? And what are you doing about climate change? So do you need to sell climate, or are people in fact already asking out there? And you just need to make sure that they ask you before they ask somebody else. And then how do you sell an open source thing? Okay, this is my secret. You go to a company and you tell them, here is free software that you can just get. And furthermore, it's better than free, okay? There's no vendor lock-in because you have all the access to the source code. So nobody could change the service and remove the features that you need. Nobody could come to you and say, we're increasing the price because whatever, we got bought out, we didn't raise a round of funding, and they can't force you to upgrade when you don't want to, and nobody has your data. And all you need to do, since you got it for free, is pay for the services as you need them. You can customize it as much as you need, or just use it out of the box. And you'll be amazed that people really respond to this because they're tired of what they see with SaaS vendors and with enterprise software, right? With exactly the stuff that I'm saying we do not do in open source. So now let's talk a little bit about the industries that we could work on. First one is just consulting, something that we should know. What is your climate footprint? Chances are it's your office space, it's travel, and it's your computing. And what is the unit of your product or service? It's the hours that you bill. Simple as that, right? For an e-commerce business, it's our shipping expense, it's our cloud computing, and then it's some smaller amount of office space, probably by the value of sales. Now, what is the shipping industry's climate footprint? It's basically the sum of all their fuel and combustion, right? From diesel to gasoline to alternative transportation fuels, divided by the distance and weight shipped. And then the interesting one for fuel and energy, okay, it's the whole production process, right? From the extraction of the fuel to the transportation of the fuel to refining, and then the leakage that happens in between, divided by the volume of fuel. The last one is very complex. Lots of field devices, data, very high value projects for that industry. But these are some industries that if you already have exposure to or you're already working with people on, then you can definitely start working on with. So what's ahead? Let me make some predictions. Easy one, okay? More disclosure requirements from regulators. It's the UK wants to be the first. The EU and the US are already following along. So China already has said that it will require climate disclosures. It just hasn't set a date. I could see within the next decade, all the major financial markets and exchanges requiring full scope 1, 2, and 3 climate disclosures. And where material, they're going to require supply and product specific emissions factors. The problem and the interesting opportunity also is that they're not going to be consistent, probably, just the way things are with the financial markets. The second thing is, and already seeing this again, with the biggest companies driving climate through their supply chains. Walmart, Apple, IKEA, Microsoft are already starting to do this in some way. They're saying, we're setting our climate targets. We want to be net zero by a certain day, or we want to reduce our emissions by a certain amount. And so that means we need to drive that through our supply chain. They absolutely have to do that because, again, majority of their emissions are in their supply chain. So they offer expertise, they offer workshops, they offer financing in some cases. And eventually, I think they'll come to cap and trade schemes in their own supply chain. So look for this to then cause all sorts of companies to start taking climate action. And finally, since there's a comment about federal government should do something, governments have been trying to do something about climate change for 30 years, okay? The Real Earth Summit happened in June of 1992. I don't know if you were back in then. And look at where we are. And I see open source and blockchain as just another way to do something about climate. This is a slide from Andreessen Horowitz, and I think it applies to climate. And the difference between open source and governments is that we in open source, within these global grassroots communities, we're totally transparent and we've been able to affect change on a global scale. Can we do that through the blockchain, through DAOs, through collaborating with each other? And so this is my own project. Remember those airline emissions and offsets? I like to start a DAO where we record our own travel emissions, and basically like a little open source project. We're then going to work on what are the right offsets, what are the right decarbonizations. Are those airlines we're flying really doing something about climate change, or is their sustainability report a lot of pretty pictures? And really apply open source principle to solve decarbonization, bring some quality to the offset market, and at the same time, create a business for the participants through monetizing our reputations. So it's kind of the end of my presentation. If you want to try it out, there's the link for the software, a link to our code. So you can sign up, give me your email, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you have ideas about what we can do, send me an email. But last but not least, any developers out there, if you want to work on climate, you can work from anywhere, do it part-time, full-time, send me an email too.